The fog hung thick and heavy over Route 18, blanketing the stretch of road near Silver Pine Valley in a ghostly gray. Ranger Ethan McAllister squinted through the haze as he guided his battered state truck around a bend, tires humming softly on the damp asphalt. His thermos of coffee sat untouched in the cup holder, steam curling up toward the windshield, forgotten. Dispatch had called it in just 15 minutes earlier. Possible wildlife collision near mile marker 212. Ethan had answered without hesitation. After 23 years patrolling these back roads, he could practically smell a deer strike before seeing it. But even before he arrived, something about this one felt different. "Should be routine," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, as he flipped on his amber lights. But as his headlights broke through the dense fog, his foot instinctively eased off the gas. There, dead center in the roadway, stood a foal. A small palomino, no taller than his chest, her golden coat glowing like fire in the mist. And behind her, sprawled across the double yellow lines, was a full-grown mare, still unmoving and clearly badly hurt. "Ah, hell," Ethan breathed. He rolled to a stop and killed the engine. The moment the quiet settled, the foal pinned her ears flat and let out a sharp, piercing whinny. Ethan opened his door slowly, stepping out with his palms raised. "It's okay, girl," he said softly, voice steady. "I'm not going to hurt you." The foal didn't budge. She stood like a sentinel, her small frame parked protectively between Ethan and her fallen mother. Her eyes were wide, not just with fear, but something more, defiance. She didn't flinch, not even as Ethan edged closer, careful not to startle her. He clicked his radio. "Dispatch, this is McAllister. I've got a live foal in the middle of Route 18. Mother's down. Possible vehicular trauma. I need a veterinary unit, animal control, and road crews ASAP. Shut it down from 210 to 214. This foal's not moving." "Copy that," came the reply through static. Ethan reached for the flare kit in the back of his truck. As he laid down the first one, he heard footsteps crunching behind him. "I didn't see them, I swear," a man's voice choked out. Ethan turned to find a middle-aged man in a flannel jacket, his face pale and stunned. "Name's Brian Kessler. I was heading to drop a load down in Klamath Falls. I didn't even see them till the last second. The fog, it was like driving through milk." Ethan gave a short nod. "You okay?" Brian nodded, wiping a hand across his jaw. "I swerved, tried to brake, hit the mare full on. She came out of nowhere." Ethan glanced back at the mare. Her body was motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of her flank. Still alive, for now. But the foal was what had his full attention. She hadn't moved an inch. Every time a car's headlights flickered through the fog, she turned her body to block the view of her mother. Every time Ethan or Brian tried to approach, she shifted, ears back, eyes sharp, making her stance even more firm. "She's been doing that since I stopped," Brian whispered. "Won't let me near. I tried to check if the mare was breathing, but she backed me off with her head low, like she meant business." Ethan studied the little palomino carefully. Her coat shimmered even in the dim light, thick with road dust, but still stunning. Her tail flicked once, nerves twitching, but her feet stayed rooted like anchors. "Smart girl," Ethan murmured. "She's not just reacting, she's thinking." From behind them, a pair of cars pulled up and stopped. Drivers stepped out, cell phones already up, recording. One of them whispered, "That's the golden foal. Look at her. She's guarding her mom." The story was already growing. Ethan walked to his truck, grabbing a handful of cones and waving the new arrivals back. "Folks, please stay behind the truck. This is a live scene. Dangerous for you and for the animals. Still, more cars began piling up. Word traveled fast in small towns, and Silver Pine Valley was no different. In minutes, there were 6 vehicles backed up in both directions. Some drivers honked until they saw what was happening, then stepped out in silence. The air was tense but reverent, like watching something sacred unfold. Ethan crouched again, watching the foal through the fog. "You're not panicking," he murmured. "You're protecting, strategizing. This ain't instinct, it's something deeper." His voice cracked slightly as he spoke into the radio again. "This foal, she's not behaving like a wild animal. She's doing something I've never seen before. We need help, fast." And still, the Palomino stood guard, alone, determined, and unyielding on a narrow stretch of Oregon blacktop, turning a routine accident into something unforgettable. The morning fog had begun to lift, but the tension on Route 18 hung thicker than ever. The crowd had doubled since sunrise. Cars lined both sides of the road, pulled off onto grassy shoulders and gravel patches. Locals whispered among themselves. Cell phones were pointed like spotlights. A reporter from the county paper hovered near the back, camera slung around her neck. But no one dared get too close. Not with the little golden foal still standing like a guard over her fallen mother. Holly. That's what someone had called her. A woman from town who'd shown up with a thermos of coffee for the Rangers. "She looks like a Holly. Strong, beautiful, and stubborn," she'd said, eyes glistening. And the name stuck. Holly hadn't moved from her position in over 2 hours. Her legs trembled from exhaustion, but she stood firm, ears flicking at every noise, her dark eyes watching everything. Ethan McAllister stood near the hood of his truck, arms crossed, jaw tight. He'd seen a lot in 20 years, but never a wild animal refusing help so intelligently, controlling the scene like this. He kept looking up the road, waiting. Finally, a white SUV with state veterinary markings pulled in behind the roadblock. Dr. Lillian Monroe climbed out before the engine stopped. She was small, sharp-eyed, with sleeves already rolled up and a stethoscope swinging from her neck. "You weren't kidding," she said as she stepped beside Ethan, surveying the scene. "I thought you were exaggerating. A foal guarding her mother? But holy hell." "She's been like that all morning," Ethan said. "Won't let anyone near, even me." Dr. Monroe stepped forward a few feet, her boots crunching on loose gravel. Holly immediately stiffened, lowered her head, and let out a low, threatening snort. The message was clear. "Back off." "I'm not here to hurt you," Dr. Monroe said softly, crouching low to appear smaller. "I'm just here to help your mama." "She understands tone," Ethan said. "I've been watching. She reads people." Dr. Monroe nodded. "I've seen instinctual protectiveness before, but this is something else." As she unpacked her med kit, another truck pulled up, this one with a teenage boy in the passenger seat. Jesse Reed stepped out slowly, arms stuffed in his worn flannel jacket. He was tall, with hay-colored hair and a permanent look of someone who'd seen too much and said too little. "Don't tell me that's the horse everyone's talking about," Jesse muttered, squinting. "A foal, holding up traffic like a highway patrol officer." "That's her," Ethan replied. "Name's Holly now." Jesse's stepdad, an old rancher named Mark, nudged him. "Pay attention, son. That little horse is doing something most grown folks wouldn't have the guts for." Jesse rolled his eyes but kept watching. Dr. Monroe knelt again, pulling out a syringe of tranquilizer for the mare. "We'll need to sedate her if we want any chance of moving her off the road," she said. "But if we spook the foal, she'll bolt?" Ethan guessed. "Worse. She could get herself killed trying to block us, or collapse from stress." They tried the first approach carefully. Dr. Monroe crept toward the mare, speaking softly, syringe hidden at her side. But Holly snapped her ears back and lunged forward, not to bite, not to kick, just to stand closer. A warning. Jessie let out a low whistle. "Dang, she ain't playin'." "Nope," Ethan muttered. "She's made up her mind." Dr. Monroe backed off, defeated. "We'll never get to her like this." There was a beat of silence, then Jessie said, almost offhand, "Has anyone tried asking her?" Ethan gave a dry chuckle. "You mean talk to her, like she's a person?" Jessie shrugged. "You said she reads people, right? What if she's waiting for permission to trust us?" Dr. Monroe glanced at him. Then slowly she nodded. "It's worth a try." The crowd watched as she stepped forward again, this time with nothing in her hands. She sat cross-legged on the pavement, far enough not to threaten, close enough to be seen. "Holly," she said gently, her voice barely more than a breath. "You've been so brave. You've done everything right. You've kept your mama safe." Holly's ears twitched. Her eyes locked on the vet. "But now," Dr. Monroe continued, "you have to let us help her. You're not alone anymore. We want the same thing you do. We want her to live." The air grew still. Even the birds stopped chirping. And then Holly moved. She turned her head slowly toward her mother, nuzzled the mare's neck, and then took 2 deliberate steps toward Dr. Monroe. Not aggressive, not afraid, just steady. The crowd gasped. Dr. Monroe slowly extended her hand. Holly looked at it, then gently pressed her velvety muzzle against her palm. Time stopped. No one spoke. No one dared move. Jessie let out a shaky breath. "Well, I'll be damned." "Looks like she just gave us permission," Ethan murmured. Dr. Monroe's voice trembled. "Then let's not waste it." Within seconds, the road transformed into an emergency triage center. Vets scrambled. The crowd parted. Road workers rerouted traffic. And through it all, Holly stood a few feet back, eyes locked on her mother, tail swishing softly, as if saying, "I'm still here, I'm not going anywhere," and from that moment on, none of them were alone. The road turned quiet again, but this time it wasn't from hesitation. It was from purpose. The crowd that had gathered now stood back, watching with reverence as the rescue effort unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. The mare, now called Grace, lay motionless, her breathing shallow and ragged. A makeshift perimeter had been set up using traffic cones and hay bales brought in by a nearby rancher. Dr. Lillian Monroe paced near her mobile unit, barking instructions into a radio. Beside her, Ranger Ethan McAllister coordinated with road crews and emergency response. And always nearby, never more than a few feet away, stood Holly. The little Palomino foal was no longer a barrier. She had become a partner. The veterinary truck's rear doors opened with a mechanical hiss, revealing a sleek, custom-built gurney designed for large animal transport. It was padded, reinforced, and equipped with a hydraulic lift. Normally, it would require a team of handlers just to move it into place, but today, the most vital part of the team stood on 4 golden legs. "We'll have to lift her just enough to slide the gurney under," Dr. Monroe explained to Ethan and the others, "and we have to do it gently. Internal bleeding, fractured ribs, possible lung puncture. Anything sudden could kill her." Ethan gave a nod. "Tell me what you need." Across the scene, Jesse Reed stood watching. He hadn't said much since Holly had touched Dr. Monroe's hand. Something about the moment had cracked something open in him. He stepped closer. "You need help?" he asked softly. Dr. Monroe looked at him, surprised. "You've got ranch experience?" "Plenty," Jesse said. "And she don't seem to mind me." "True enough," Holly had flicked an ear toward him but hadn't protested when he'd walked a little closer. "Let's give it a shot," Dr. Monroe said. They moved carefully. Jessie led with a soft voice, walking slowly across the pavement. Holly didn't flinch. As the team approached Grace with ropes and pads, the foal circled once and then returned to her usual post, just above her mother's head. "She's watching everything we do," Ethan muttered. "She's not just watching," Dr. Monroe corrected. "She's learning." The team bent down, working in sync. They wrapped padded slings beneath Grace's body and attached them to the lift arms. Holly let out a soft, low nicker, encouraging, not fearful. "She's coaching her," someone whispered. The hydraulic lift hummed to life. Slowly, Grace's limp body began to rise off the asphalt, her legs dangling gently. Holly reared slightly, her front hooves lifting just high enough for her muzzle to stay in contact with her mother's face. Ethan had to look away for a moment. "Easy, girl," Dr. Monroe whispered as the team guided Grace onto the waiting gurney. "Almost there?" With careful hands and whispered words, they lowered her into place and locked the supports. Then came the moment of truth. The trailer. It sat parked just beyond the gurney, its rear ramp extended. For most wild horses, just the sight of such a contraption would send them into a frenzy. But Holly wasn't most wild horses. She approached the ramp cautiously, nostrils flaring as she sniffed the wood. Her hooves clacked softly as she placed one foot on the edge, then stepped back. She looked behind her at the gurney, then turned back to the trailer. "She's checking it," Jessie said in awe, "like she's testing it before letting her mom be moved." Dr. Monroe nodded. "She's asking if it's safe." Ethan stepped up beside her. "So give her the answer." Dr. Monroe knelt at the base of the ramp. "It's okay, Holly. It's strong. It'll hold her. We promise." Holly tilted her head, then, without hesitation, stepped up the ramp. She walked the length of it, paused at the top, and turned to face the gurney as if giving the all-clear. "That's our green light," said the transport tech, voice thick with emotion. With Holly standing sentinel inside, the team rolled Grace gently up the ramp and into the trailer, locking the gurney into place and securing the sides. Holly remained inside, watching it all. Then, once Grace was secured, she turned and walked back down the ramp to Ethan. She stood before him, eyes deep and knowing. Ethan removed his hat, knelt, and whispered, "Thank you, little lady." Holly stepped forward and pressed her muzzle softly against the badge on his chest. Time seemed to stop again. "She's saying goodbye," someone murmured. But she wasn't. As the truck engine roared to life, headed toward Oregon State University's veterinary hospital, Holly trotted forward and jumped into the open side stall of the trailer. She wasn't leaving her mother. No one dared stop her. The door slammed shut. 60 miles away, at the veterinary hospital, alarms would blare within the hour. Grace's vitals would crash. Technicians would rush. Monitors would scream. And Holly, riding quietly in the trailer, would lift her head just moments before any human knew what was happening. She already knew, and she was coming. The soft clink of metal against tile echoed in the large animal wing at Oregon State University's veterinary hospital. Overhead, lights bathed the sterile corridors in a pale glow as the transport vehicle backed into the service bay. It had been a tense 60-mile drive from Silver Pine Valley, but the team inside the hospital was already prepped and waiting. As the trailer doors creaked open, the staff expected to see the injured mare, and maybe, if luck held, a shaken foal that would need to be sedated or restrained. They didn't expect what they got. "She stayed the whole ride?" Dr. Jennifer Walsh asked, peering into the trailer. "She didn't budge," the transport technician replied. Watched her mama the entire way, didn't make a sound. Inside, Grace lay strapped securely to the padded gurney. Her breathing was still weak, chest wrapped tightly to stabilize broken ribs. Beside her stood Holly, ears alert, body tense but calm. The moment the trailer stopped, the little foal had shifted her stance to stand at Grace's head again. She never took her eyes off her, the tech said softly. "Neither will we, Doctor," Walsh replied. The team rolled Grace into the surgery prep area. As the gurney passed through the wide doors, Holly tried to follow, but a nurse stepped into her path out of habit. "Whoa, wait, we can't have the foal in the OR before anyone could intervene." Holly let out a sharp, high-pitched whinny. Not frantic, just insistent. The same protective call she'd made on the highway. "Let her in," Dr. Walsh said, silencing the protest with a glance. "We'll keep her in the observation alcove above the surgical suite." But no buts. That foal might be the only reason this mare's alive right now. She's part of the team. Holly followed close behind, hooves clacking gently across the tile floor. A veterinary assistant led her into the glass-fronted alcove just above the surgery floor, a space normally reserved for visiting researchers or family members. Holly stood at the glass, watching every move below as Grace was prepped for surgery. From the moment the procedure began, it was clear Grace was worse off than expected. Her lung had collapsed, her ribs were fragmented. Her body was in shock, her heart rate unstable. And yet, whenever her vital signs began to drop, something strange happened. Holly would react before the monitors. She would stamp once, let out a low, throaty whinny, or press her nose hard against the glass like she could sense her mother slipping. "She's synced to her," one of the residents whispered. Dr. Monroe, who had driven down behind the transport and now stood beside Dr. Walsh, said quietly, "She's not reacting. She's warning us." For 4 grueling hours, the surgical team worked. Grace's breathing faltered more than once. The monitors flatlined briefly before rallying, and each time Holly responded, sometimes seconds ahead of the staff. As the final sutures were laid and the anesthesia slowly reduced, Grace remained unconscious, but her vitals stabilized. "We did it," Dr. Walsh exhaled. "She made it." "And so did we," Dr. Monroe added, looking toward the alcove. Holly was still there, her head lowered, her eyes half-lidded but awake, waiting. In the days that followed, Holly became more than just a companion. She became a caregiver. She never left Grace's stall, not for food, not for sleep. She stood vigil, only resting in short bursts when Grace did. If a tech came too close too quickly, Holly would step in, not to interfere, but to supervise. Within 48 hours, Grace began to stir. Her eyelids fluttered, her ears twitched, and when she opened her eyes fully for the first time, she locked onto Holly and relaxed. "She recognizes her," Jesse said, his voice hushed. He'd shown up the morning after the surgery, hitching a ride with Dr. Monroe. He'd barely spoken on the way down, but the moment he saw Holly at the stall, he hadn't looked away. Grace's recovery was slow, painful, and full of small setbacks. But Holly met each one with quiet determination. When Grace refused water, Holly would nudge the bucket, splashing gently until her mother responded. When Grace needed to shift sides to avoid pressure sores, Holly would circle to the other side and nuzzle her, coaxing her into motion. It wasn't random, it was responsive, purposeful. "She's a nurse," said Dr. Sandra Reeves, a cognitive animal behaviorist brought in from Seattle. "A 4-legged nurse with no training and more instinct than I've ever seen." "She's beyond instinct," Dr. Monroe replied. "This is empathetic problem-solving. She's learning and adapting faster than we are." One afternoon, Jesse sat quietly near the stall with a sketchbook in his lap. He wasn't drawing anything in particular, just lines and shapes, but Holly kept glancing at him between moments with her mother. "You're something else," he said to her softly. "I used to think animals just reacted. No plans, no feelings, just instinct." Holly stared back at him, eyes calm and deep as lakes. "Well," he said with a small smile, "guess I was wrong." The most remarkable moment came a week into Grace's therapy. The mare was standing for short periods now, still wobbly, ribs heavily bandaged. Holly stood close, almost shoulder to shoulder, as Grace tried to take her first step. She faltered. Without a sound, Holly shifted her weight, bracing against her mother's side, steadying her just enough to catch her balance. "Did you see that?" Kate Morrison, the hospital's physical therapist, gasped. She knew exactly when to move. "She anticipated it," Dr. Reeves whispered. "That's planning, anticipation. This is revolutionary." And Holly wasn't done. When Grace needed extra support, Holly would gently guide her toward the padded wall. When the medical team introduced a new piece of therapy equipment, Holly inspected it first, then led Grace toward it slowly, like a trained assistant. She was more than just helpful. She was essential. At night, after the ward had quieted, Jesse would sneak an extra blanket and sit by the stall, watching the two horses breathe in unison. And on one of those quiet nights he said softly, "You're not just a horse, Holly. You're a healer." 8 months later, the air in Silver Pine Valley felt lighter, like the land itself had exhaled after holding its breath far too long. A narrow dirt road curved through wildflower meadows, cutting between open pastures and whispering pines, before arriving at the newly finished wooden arch that read Sunridge Sanctuary. Beneath the sign, an old iron gate stood open, more symbolic than functional. Here, no animal was ever truly kept in. At the far end of the field, under a tall cottonwood tree, stood Grace, her bay coat gleaming in the mid-morning sun, a faint scar barely visible along her ribs. Next to her, trotting lightly through the tall grass, was Holly, her golden coat glowing like firelight, mane rippling as she moved. They looked like something out of a dream. Dr. Lillian Monroe stood at the fence line, arms folded, her eyes misty. She watched as Holly gently nudged a nervous colt toward a low feeding trough. The colt, a rescue from an illegal roundup in Nevada, had arrived 3 weeks ago half-starved and trembling at the slightest touch. Now, thanks to Holly, he was eating. "Third time she's gotten him to finish a full meal," Jesse said as he approached from the stable with a halter over one shoulder. "She's got the magic," Dr. Monroe replied, smiling. "Somehow, she just knows what each one needs." Jesse leaned on the fence beside her. It's like she was born to do this. Since that first day on Route 18, everything had changed. Dr. Monroe, moved by what she'd witnessed, used a small inheritance from her late grandmother to buy this stretch of land. 12 acres of pasture, a refurbished barn, and a weathered ranch house she'd turned into her home and office. With support from Oregon State's veterinary program and a few well-placed grants, she opened the sanctuary with one mission: provide healing space for horses that no one else knew what to do with. Horses like the Nevada colt, horses like Grace, and horses who were never broken, but could somehow fix what others could not. Holly. Word had spread quickly. First local ranchers, then out-of-state rescue groups, and eventually national media picked up the story. News crews came and went. A documentary crew spent a week filming. The sanctuary received letters, donations, even offers to buy Holly outright, each politely but firmly rejected. "She's not a commodity," Dr. Monroe had told one wealthy horse breeder. "She's a gift." Holly had become the heart of the sanctuary. She worked without commands, without training. She moved among the animals like a quiet presence of comfort, adjusting her behavior depending on what each one needed. Sometimes she stood close, sharing her warmth. Sometimes she kept her distance, simply being there until the other horse was ready. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in Grace. Though still partially limited by her injuries, Grace had begun mimicking her daughter's techniques. She would stand nearby when a new rescue arrived, posture relaxed, ears forward. She'd approach slowly, let the horse smell her, then gently guide them toward water or shelter. "She's the mentor," said Dr. Sandra Reeves, now a regular visitor and researcher at the sanctuary. Holly's intuition and Grace's steadiness. It's like watching a teacher and apprentice swap places depending on the moment. Together, the mother-daughter duo had rehabilitated over a dozen traumatized horses, animals that no human could reach. There was Max, a thoroughbred stallion retired from racing with aggression issues. Daisy, a Mustang mare who'd been burned in a barn fire. And Clyde, a young gelding who'd never let anyone touch him until Holly lay down in his stall and simply waited. "They changed the rules," Dr. Reeves said during a campus lecture. "They're rewriting the science of animal emotional intelligence right in front of us." Ranger Ethan McAllister visited once a week. He never stayed long, just long enough to bring supplies or watch Holly work. Sometimes he leaned on the fence, eyes distant, thinking about that foggy morning. Other times, he just stood silently with a hand resting on Grace's withers, grateful. "You know," he told Jessie once, "I've seen soldiers with less loyalty than that little horse showed." Jessie had changed too. No longer the quiet, brooding kid who rolled his eyes at everything. He now worked full-time at the sanctuary. He cared for the animals, gave tours, and even led workshops for troubled teens learning how to work with rescue horses. "They see themselves in these animals," Jessie said one day, "and then they see Holly, and they realize healing's possible." That morning, a new transport pulled through the gates. Inside was a small Mustang colt with a swollen leg and eyes wide with fear. As the trailer doors opened, he cowered in the corner, hooves scraping nervously. "Poor guy's frozen," the driver said, "won't move, not even for oats." "Let her try, doctor," Monroe said quietly. Holly trotted across the pasture, graceful and calm. She climbed the trailer ramp without hesitation, pausing halfway to let the colt see her. No pressure, no sound, just presence. The colt didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, cautiously, he inched forward, trembling. Holly took another step back, inviting him to follow. He did. When his front hooves hit the dirt, the entire crew watching from the barn let out a breath. It was subtle, magical, ordinary, and completely astonishing. As Holly led the colt across the field, Grace stood under the cottonwood tree, watching. There was no envy in her eyes, only pride. Dr. Monroe stood nearby, arms crossed. She smiled as the sun spilled golden light across the pasture, turning Holly's coat into something nearly celestial. She once stood on a foggy road and refused to walk away. She whispered. That single act of love saved a life and changed countless more. And in the quiet of the sanctuary, with hope blooming in every blade of grass, the foal who wouldn't leave had become the mare who helped others stay.